And now part two of my conversation with Benjamin Lohr, author of The Secret Life of Groceries, The Dark Miracle of the American Supermarket. Enjoy. One of the things you say in the book is that it's not a matter of we are what we eat, but we eat the way we are.
Yeah.
Explain that statement to the audience.
Well, that's a concluding statement. So you've been on a bit of a journey by the time you arrive at that. And the journey takes you through some pretty dark places in the chain. At that point, we've ridden with a trucker who is caught in something very close to debt peonage, if not actual debt peonage, where she's grinding out a poverty line income, working 80 hours a day to pay off payments on a truck where she's
80 hours a week, not 80 hours.
80 hours a week. Yes, it would be quite a day.
Her life is tough, but it's not that tough.
It's not located on Jupiter, which has like an 80-hour day. But yes, and then we see in-store employees who are kind of tossed around by just-in-time scheduling and go to Thailand and spend time with migrants who are actually trafficked and bought and sold. And these are some horrifying things. And I think the natural reaction to that is, well, not in my name. Like, I don't want these things to exist. And one of the things that I was trying to connect, and I don't know to what extent it was successful, but was how the values that we as consumers bring to the marketplace and demand retailers embody in terms of choice, low price, abundance, instantaneous availability, those values that we all use when we're picking over products in the store and scanning ingredient lists and being good, picky, judicious shoppers, translate to some of these horrifying practices that are both distant from us and out of sight. But
well, I do think that the story, the secret life of groceries, but in so many ways, the book struck me as being about the secret life of the people who bring us groceries.
Yes, I think that's right.
And one of the things that I found most fascinating in the book, now the book was, pretty much finished before the pandemic. So there is an discussion about the essentialness to which the industry and the culture, quite frankly, sort of ascribed to these people during a time when there was scarcity. Mm. But you were pointing to the essentialness of these people, whether it's the guy working the fish counter at Whole Foods, not you, the guy you work with, the truck driver, the people on a fishing boat, even the entrepreneurial woman who's just
Julie, just grinding it out like this spark of American ingenuity,
and just hanging on, and she's a success story. That's she's got a happy ending, right? But to me, that was the interesting thing, because I do think this is an industry where there is a line of demarcation between value, which everybody focuses on, and values, which are not always the focus to the extent that maybe they should be. And the book really focuses on the sort of the ethical underpinnings or lack thereof of some of the products that we're seeing.
Absolutely. And I think to be clear, I don't see it even remotely as a grocery problem or a food problem. These are huge structural issues in the way we've set up society, so that they show up so that we're creating various races to the bottom at various levels of the supply chain that end up creating a world where labor is often seen as just a cost to cut. And like I said, it starts from like our policy of really separating out consumption and labor in economic policy. Like, we do things that reward businesses that get low price because that's good for the consumer, and that happens on like a big macro level. But then we kind of forget that our consumers and the laborers are often the exact same people, and the way you're getting that good deal, you know, there is no free lunch. It's coming out of something, and it's often coming out of labor, because we've also structured a commodity game where just to get into the game, you have to meet all these barriers, you know, and that are act as fixed prices that really you can't negotiate on. So where can you negotiate on? You negotiate on your labor costs and or, you know, associated benefits around that, and it results in pretty dehumanizing world where people are treated like products.
I you know, a line that I've used often on Morning Newsbeat is that nobody really knows what anything costs.
Yes.
And that's, I mean, it's especially true, I think, in the supermarket industry, but I think it's true across the board. That because we're all right. I mean, we're either deceived into thinking it costs something, so we'll say, or there's so many promotional allowances, or how, you know, we don't know.
It's such a good point. It's such a good point. So this is not in the book at all, but over the course of writing this book, I met with lots of people in the industry, and you know, my go-to thing would be, let's walk through a grocery store together and like schmooze around, and that would be a good scene. There's actually, I don't think there's any scenes of that in the book, but it was just kind of my go-to interview thing. And all of these guys, especially the guys on the inside who were buyers or middlemen, would go to this thing where they'd be like, pull off two items from the shelf and be like, okay, let me explain to you why these two prices are different. And then they would start to like unpack it. And then there would be a point in it where they just stopped, and they were like, would come to whatever calculation they would have, and it would be totally wrong. And then they would realize that like this process they were using to build up the price didn't actually work. And it was just this repeated phenomenon that was like kind of hilarious. Like both, they were trying to demonstrate the like rationality of prices and how the different levels of the chain that went into creating it, and then end up kind of baffled by where they would get, and they'd be off by a few dollars or a few, you know, like 50 cents, which of course is all the difference in the world.
Yeah, that's the difference between profit and loss in a lot of cases.
Right.
And it may be in a lot of cases 2 or 3 times the whatever the profit and loss is.
Right.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that people will get from reading this book, whether you're inside the industry or outside the industry, and you use the phrase, you know, the grind. It is such a grind at almost every level. I mean, there are companies out there probably for whom it's less of a grind, simply because they are a little bit more theatrical. They're a little bit more magical, although they're probably still a grind underneath. They just hide it better.
They hide the grind well.
Right. But it is such a grind. I mean, when you're talking with, you know, you talk about swine farms, you know, I mean, I've been to beef processing warehouse. You go to those, you never think of a steak the same way again.
No.
Right?
I think the grind point is really interesting and connected to this labor question, because when you think of how the grind shows up in the book, it's markedly different for people depending on their ownership position. You know, so Julie, I talked to this entrepreneur, Julie Boucher of Slausa, who's this great coleslaw salsa condiment that she is militant about bringing to shelf. And she is, one of the most hardworking humans I've ever met. And if anyone could be caught in a grind, it's Julie with this product. But she's an owner in a true sense. She's a shareholder, stakeholder, whatever you want to call it. Like, she is bought into the success of her product. So the grind on her, although it's brutal, and in many ways, you know, you don't come out of that section not having respect for her. It's one that acts as an optimistic story. Whereas, you know, the trucker I talked to, or the retail employees who are making $15 an hour now after some minimum wage boosts, and the trucker, you know, making terrible wages, but they're so detached from the end product, and they have no stake. They aren't shareholders in this. They are just treated as disposable. And the grind is just a different type of grind. And so how do we figure out how to build systems where we get people connected so that they can buy? Like, we're in a capitalist society. That grind is going to be there no matter what. And how do we shift things so that it's a celebrated grind, like Julie, with positive attributes, as opposed to something that's just extractive and wearing people down into nubs, which is frankly, what I saw.
Well, listen, I think it speaks to the phenomenon. I think the companies that you see, whether they're retailers or they're manufacturers that have created employee stock ownership programs, or very, very liberal, stock, they see profit sharing programs, things like that. People walk with a different spring in their step. I mean, if Winco
100%.
is a warehouse store, right? That's focused on value, but the people who work in those stores, because they own a piece of it, I mean, they own it. Now they'll work extra, they'll work harder, they'll do all the things necessary because they know they see some value from it. What's Bob's, the grain company that makes
Yes.
oatmeal and things like that. I mean, he gave the company to his employees. I mean, those people, there is a difference,
It's a
I think.
beautiful thing. Yeah, and I think it's important, like where that happens in name only. Where that happens in practice and actuality, and where it happens in name only, and is this kind of tool for you creating like a halo around the company. I mean, some of the more brutal interviews I did was with Whole Foods employees who, at the time, this was 2015 and 2016,
Right.
so pre-merger. Whole Foods had great benefit policies and they had a lot of good things on the book, but they just didn't feel bought into the chain. And this may have been something that was just at the store I was working at. It's really hard to draw big conclusions from this, but you could see that they felt even worse because they were supposedly working for some enlightened company. And instead their day-to-day reality was, oh, I don't feel like I have any job security. I don't feel like I'm bought in here at all. I feel like my benefits are just out of reach. That it's double morale.
Which is amazing because people would always look at Whole Foods and say that their employees are a step above because
Yes.
they weren't just talking to, the phrase is always, they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk. You had to be a believer in the Whole Foods approach to the marketplace in terms of health and things like that if you were going to work there. I mean,
Yes.
if you ate Oreos for breakfast, you didn't get a job at Whole Foods,
Yeah.
um, right?
And I think that I think we froze up for a second there.
So,
I was just gonna, yeah. I think we just froze for a second. But I think that's exactly right. And I do think that is something that eroded over time. It seems like that was definitely true for a large portion of that company. And honestly, it could have just been, when you're writing nonfiction and you're using human voices, there is an anecdote problem that comes up, and whether or not I tried to choose people who I thought were representative of bigger trends that I was also getting from other sources, but that's something that you suffer with.
well, you did an amazing job. Let me ask you one last question, and it's actually sort of an anecdote that you were talking to uh, a consultant who referred to himself. He said he was the kind of person, he said, who was an asset in an innovation culture and an asshole in a maintenance culture. And to me, that phrase, although it wasn't meant, I think, specifically to illustrate this, really painted a vivid picture for me about where much of the grocery industry is and where ideally it needs to go.
Yeah.
Even today, and maybe even particularly today, because everybody's been treading water for the last 6 months, but it is, for most companies, it has very much been a maintenance culture.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that, but in view of, competitive, especially competitive threats from a company like Amazon, which, by the way, has an innovation culture, they have to develop innovation cultures. Is that a fair extrapolation from his comment?
I think that's 100% fair. So that was Earl Schweizer, who is former head of grocery at Whole Foods. And I think he would agree with that as well. I mean, he's a dyed-in-the-wool optimist about the power of grocery for positive change, but the big problem is the complacency where people get stuck in routines and there's something about the grocery store where you have this kind of feudal amount of employees and regular customers that are buying from you, that when the ground underneath you shifts, it shifts slowly, so you don't necessarily notice it all at once. And figuring out it's shifting right now, and figuring out how to get on that innovation culture seems like a big piece of the game.
Yeah, well, you had another line in the book which grabbed my attention, because you were talking about the upheaval of the past 5 years, and that doesn't include the pandemic.
Yeah.
And where you said most primal drives in the industry weren't so much disrupted as elevated and laid bare. And I think that's so true, because that's what happened specifically because of competition from companies like Amazon. And now what's happened because of the pandemic is all that stuff has been accelerated 3, 4, 5 years into the future.
Hyperspeed.
Right? Leaving these companies to figure out, how are they going to be different at coming out of this than they were going in.
Yeah. And I think we have some signs of what that's going to look like with Amazon, Peapod, but we are moving at hyperspeed now, and every problem that existed in terms of labor is just going to get amplified by Corona and the shifts that are required to respond to that. If
you had to underline one, or not so much prescribe in terms of giving people a solution, but in terms of pointing to one specific thing that the industry needs to address, would it be how it treats its people? And when I say it, I'm talking about the entire supply chain, from the farms and the boats to the and the grain factories, all the way to where the product is sold.
Yeah, I think it's connected. It's a social issue. It's a societal issue. There's no reason to lay it on the feet of the grocery industry or retail industry in general. But how to create those authentic shareholder relationships with employees so they feel like they are connected. That is definitely a takeaway in terms of the current ways we have for ensuring that, like through audits and certification regimes, are really bad at doing that job. And if people who are so clear-sighted and can see like airport security as theater, and are like, oh, Bush and Cheney are upping the threat level from yellow to orange, and now it's at red, and laugh at that type of thing, will wholeheartedly believe the audit system for fair trade or rainforest friendly, because those systems can't be the way to creating this type of change. There needs to be something that's much more basic and primitive in how we treat people, and I think that's going to be involved in how we create them as actual shareholders who are connected to the outputs that they're working towards.
Well, Benjamin Lohr, the book is called The Secret Life of Groceries.
Yes.
It is well, hold one up, because mine is on Kindle. There you go. I will put some links to Amazon and at least one independent retailer so people can buy it, not necessarily from Amazon. The reviews have been fabulous. I think everybody should read it, and I really appreciate you spending time with me today.
Kevin, it has been a super pleasure. And for people who don't, you really set me off on this journey. I reached out to Kevin in 2015 when I was just starting this book. I didn't know anything. Like I said, I just spent 3 years working on a yoga book. I'm a nonfiction writer, so switching topics is what I want to do, but I didn't know anything. And I really felt like you squared my shoulders and set me walking in the right direction, just in terms of both like a detailed, nuanced understanding of the world, but also really humanistic one that I felt like had a set of values that I also buy into, which that combo is rare. Like there are people who excel at both of those things, but at one individually, but rarely both.
Well, I appreciate that. The key to it, and the key to one of the great things about the book, is that you talk to lots of people a lot smarter than I am. So
I don't know.
So,
I don't know if I agree.
Kudos for that.
I don't know if I agree, but thank you.
Anyway,
And
well, thank you. Good luck. I know book tours are probably a little strange these days, but good luck with the book. I hope you sell a gazillion of them and they turn it into a major motion picture. So anyway, take care. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Thank you.